Alright guys, welcome back to the Trank, and today we are going to be doing something I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is a complete table saw maintenance and tune-up, as well as changing out the blades. So currently I've just got this old raggedy blade that came with the saw, and it is dull and gets pretty terrible cuts. And so what we're going to be installing is this Freud combo blade. So this is a 24 tooth, this is a 60 tooth, so that's going to help getting cleaner cuts for some of these projects I'm doing. But then the other thing is this actually alternates teeth. One of them is just your standard beveled tooth, but then the tooth behind it and in front of it is a flat ground tooth, and so I'm going to be able to get flat ground cuts, which is going to be great for doing dados and rabbets and other joinery. So really excited to get this in here. So the first thing we're going to do before we do any sort of calibration of the table saw is just go ahead and switch this blade out. Alright guys, so I just wanted to point out a couple good references for when you're doing any sort of maintenance. Of course, is the user manual for your tool. You can find lots of things on YouTube and online, but in my opinion, nothing beats, you know, physical print copies of information, especially from the manufacturer. So I'm going to be going through this, as well as this book by John White. He's one of the shop managers over at Fine Woodworking, and he has this book. It's really comprehensive on shop mechanics, and goes over a lot of the methods used for calibrating all sorts of different shop machines. So we're going to be using his methods for calibrating this once the blade's installed, so I just wanted to kind of show those. So while maintenance is going to change for every table saw and every manufacturer, I'm going to be going over kind of the steps for this DeWalt Jobsite table saw. And just a good tip, it does include, of course, the wrenches used to remove and change the blade. They're contained right on the side here behind a wing nut. So first thing we're going to do is just take off the throat plate here. Make sure your machine's powered off, obviously, before you do any sort of maintenance inside. And then from here, we're just going to take out the splitter or the riving knife, and that's pretty simple. There's just this 3-prong knob here, and we're just going to loosen that up. Now once you have this knob here completely loosened, what you're going to do is just push in on it and take out the knife. Okay, so with the riving knife and throat plate removed, we can just go ahead and loosen the nut over the arbor plate here, and then we're going to take this blade out and do a bit of cleaning. Okay, well that took a bit of convincing, and I had to upgrade wrenches here, but I finally did get it loose. So with that, we can just finish taking off this nut. There. And make sure you be careful you don't lose this flat washer down in there. So you see we've got the arbor washer here and the blade. And with everything removed from the table saw, including the components on the side here, we're going to use this time to go ahead and clean and lubricate all the major components underneath the saw. So some components we're going to want to pay attention to here. We've got the worm gears here attached to these orthogonal gears, and these are the actual system that's used to raise and lower the blade. And I cleared out the dust, but there's still a lot of residue in those, and mine is starting to slow down and jam when I'm trying to raise the blade. So those are something that you definitely want to be cleaning out and lubricating. Over here, you're going to see this from the front angle as well, but these are actually the cams that are there to set your 90 degree and 45 degree stops. We're going to be calibrating those pretty much in just a second here. And you can see here we've got the trunnion. This is what the blade is contained in, and it pivots, and the screws that you're going to want to pay attention to are these two Allen heads. Of course there's two on the other side, but to actually pivot this to make sure it's aligned with your miter gauge, you only need to loosen two. And so we're going to be taking care of that, but I just wanted to point out these kind of couple important features that are going to require some tuning. So for lubricating, there's lots of different routes you can go, but you're probably going to want to use some sort of a dry lubricant in most cases. I know SG 4000 is one lubricant that a lot of people like to use. I don't have any dry lubricant on hand right now, and so I'm just going to be using some good old Johnson's paste wax, which kind of is the solution for a lot of problems, but this repels dust pretty well. So what I'm going to do is just use an old toothbrush to apply a bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and shift these a little and work that in and apply a bit more. And you want to get in there and clean out all this gunk that's trapped between the teeth of these gears. Okay, so we've got a lot of the important components kind of lubricated there. Next thing we're going to do is actually put the new blade on before we do any sort of calibration. One thing you do want to check is that the nut and the arbor plate here are clean, that your nuts doesn't have any sort of damaged threads or anything. Otherwise that's just going to make things a pain later. Mine are clean and good to go, so we're just going to reinstall this. Just know what you do. There's a beveled inside and an extruded side. You want the extruded side facing out, so facing away from the blade. So just to show here, guys, I don't know if the camera is going to pick this up, but essentially what we have is alternating teeth, and so on one we have a beveled tooth, and then the next will be a flat ground, and so that's going to allow us to get good cutting action with rip cuts. So we're not sacrificing that. If you got an all flat ground blade, you're going to sacrifice some of that strength with rip cuts. So these beveled cuts are going to be great for that, and then these flat ground teeth are going to be great for cross cuts, for getting any sort of flat bottom cuts we need for joinery. So before we do any sort of calibration with the blade with respect to the miter slot, first thing we want to do is check that the blade is exactly perpendicular 90 degrees to the table. So what you want to do, easiest way to do this, you can do this with just a speed square, but I do have this digital gauge here. And so what we're going to do is you want to set this exactly on your table, and we're going to zero this. Alright, now we're just going to attach this to our blade. And you can see we're at our 90 degree stop, but we are actually at 90.3. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this cam. So you see that little disc, black disc there with the circles, that is the cam stop. And so right now it's saying we're at 90 degrees, but clearly we're not. So there's just this little Phillips head screw there, and what we're going to do is just loosen that and then break the lever gear and just put the blade over that pinch, and as soon as this is exactly at 90, then we'll retighten the cam gear and we'll be good to go. Well, unfortunately for us, this cam screw is completely rutted out and locked in place. So we're going to drill this out and try and reattach this cam with just a step size higher bolt and a nut, and you'll have to manually adjust the cam with the by loosening the bolt or the nut and then just rotating this cam. But once you do it once, it should be good to go for a long time. So here goes nothing. Alright guys, so we got these stops dialed in, so you can see the blade's at a random angle. I'm going to go ahead and set it to the 90 degree stop, and you can hear it hit, and we can see we are right at 90, perfect. And now I'm going to move it up to the 45 degree stop and lock it down, and you can see we are 1/10 of a degree off, which is good enough for me. So with those dialed in, it's time to move on to the next step. Alright guys, so we are on to the next step. We are going to ensure that the blade is completely parallel with the miter slot. And so the way you want to do this, it's easiest to do this with a dial indicator like I have here. You can do this with just a straight edge or a speed square, but it's much more accurate to do it this way, and this dial gauge was only about 20 bucks. So all I've done here is I put a threaded insert into this piece of MDF, and I put this 1/4 inch 20 rod, and then I use 2 nuts here to secure the dial gauge. That allows me to move the dial gauge back and forth, in and out if I need. And then I'm just going to be clamping this onto the miter gauge, and all we're going to do is mark a dot right below the tooth, because the teeth are sometimes cut differently. So right below the tooth, we're going to put a black dot with a Sharpie. We are then going to slide this in and zero the gauge. At that point, we'll just rotate that black dot tooth to the back side, and we'll bring this, which is fixed in space, and put it against the same exact black dot. And if this indicator is moved from 0, that means we're slightly at a tilt from the miter slot, and we'll then go in and adjust. So here we go. Okay, so you can see we are way off here. So, time to adjust the tilt of the blade. You can see on the underside of the saw here, we've got these 2 Allen wrench sockets. And what we're going to just do is loosen those 2 and then just slightly tap the trunnion in the direction that I need correction. And then we're going to go back up and recheck the scale. So what I've done is just slightly loosen those. You really don't need to loosen them that much. Now what I do is I have the gauge on that second tooth position, and I'm just watching the gauge. And I'm just going to take a rubber mallet and real lightly tap on this. Other way. Alright, until it's reading 0 again. Now what I'm going to do is just carefully start tightening that. And then we're going to go back and recheck the calibration and probably do it on a second tooth. Okay, so after a bit of tweaking, we finally have this thing dialed in. So you can see we are on the second position, and we are pretty much right on the 0 point. So now we'll just slide our gauge back and carefully rotate our reference tooth and line this up with the tooth. And you can see we're pretty much right at 0 still. So this dial is probably not even though they say it is, it's probably barely accurate to the 1,000th. So getting this is pretty much good enough for me. So we're going to move on to the fence. Okay, so the gauge is 0, at least zeroed enough for this first run. So now what we're going to do is just run the gauge across the fence, and we're just going to carefully monitor our gauge and look at how much it's deviating from side to side. So here we go, we're at 0. So at the other side here, we were at just below 40, which is terrible. And so all you have to do is loosen these socket head screws that the fence is resting on, and just slightly adjust them and then we're just going to redo it and keep doing this until we deviate no more than about 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch across the length of the fence. So this terrible out of parallel is, I'm sure, what was causing lots of issues. So here we go. Okay, so that took quite a bit of adjusting, and you have to come to it, just accept that on a job site table saw like this, you know, you're not going to get this in within 2 thousandths of an inch. It's just not going to happen. I mean, there's slop in the miter gauge. The resolution of this is most likely not as good as it says they are. There's a good chance this fence isn't perfectly flat. In fact, I know it's not, because the gauge starts to dip off at the end every single time. So, however, if you watch the gauge, we do have this to where it's pretty much only drifting within about 3/1000ths or so across the main length of the blade, the fence. And for our purposes, that's going to be good enough. Again, on a real cabinet saw, you're going to be able to get this in even better. But if you compare this to the 50/1000ths that this was off when we started, this is a lot better. So I'm not going to show this, but basically what we're going to do, because there's two positions for the fence, is we're just going to double check that it's square on the second position. And with that, this project's going to be done. And I'm just going to finish up with a bit of paste wax on the top to get things sliding freely, and we are done. So again, guys, this project can be kind of intimidating to start. I think it is for most people, but if you just take the time to learn, how to do this, how to set your tool and how to set it up, it really pays off to know how to take care of your tools. You're going to get way better cuts with them. And so that's it for the table saw. Be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.